Hey yo, what it do? Welcome back to another episode of Elevation Talks. Listen, if you're new here, I am your host, Naye Liggines. And today, I want to have a real conversation. Not one of those conversations where we just throw a bunch of inspirational quotes and tell people, just trust God. Because if we're honest, sometimes when you are in the middle of a difficult season, which a lot of us are, hearing just trust God can feel easier said than done, especially when you've been trying. I'm talking about you've been praying, you've been worshiping, you've been showing up, you've been trying to make better decisions, you've been trying to grow, right? And you've even been trying to become the person God has called you to be. Am I speaking to anybody? Yes, sir. I'm speaking to myself. Yeah. But the thing is, you've been asking God to change and it still hasn't changed. And that's a hard place to sit in. And I'm speaking from personal experience. I can't tell y'all how many times I wake up in the morning and as soon as I talk to God, for those of y'all that know me, y'all know as soon as I wake up, I spend intentional time with God. And I always say, Lord, let today be the day where everything changes. Woo, come on. I know I'm not by myself. Listen, there is real tension between faith and frustration. We talk about trusting God when the blessings come, right? We talk about trusting God when the doors open. We talk about trusting God when the testimony is already written, right? But one of the things that I feel like we don't talk about enough is about the middle. Like, what about the middle? What about the season where you're still waiting? What about the season where you have more questions than answers? What about the season where you look at your life and say, God, I know you're faithful, but I don't understand what you're doing right now. Yo, that's been me too many times. And I think a lot of people are there, whether they admit it or not. Maybe you're listening in right now and you've been waiting on something. Maybe it's a career opportunity. Maybe it's a financial breakthrough. Maybe it's healing. Maybe it's restoration in a relationship. Maybe it's even clarity about your purpose. Maybe it's something that you haven't even told anybody because it's that personal. But you've been carrying this question, God, when? When is the change going to happen? When am I going to see something different? When am I going to actually feel like I'm moving forward? And I want to start this by saying this. Those questions don't mean that you don't have faith. That means you're human. Even people with strong faith have moments where they wonder, God, what are you doing? The Bible is full of people who had to wrestle with waiting. David was anointed to be king, but he had to walk through a season where he wasn't sitting on the throne. Yeah. Joseph had a dream, but before he actually saw the promise, he went through betrayal, rejection, and prison. Moses was called to lead, right? But before he led a nation, he spent years in the wilderness. The promise was real, but the process was necessary. And I think that's something we struggle with because we love the promise, but we don't always love the process to the promise. You understand what I'm saying? Like, we want the destination, but we don't always want the journey. We want the answered prayers, but we don't always want the transformation that happens while we're waiting. And that's what I want to talk about today. How to recognize God when nothing is changing. How do you see him when your circumstances still look the same? How do you continue trusting him when you're in a season where you don't have all the answers? Because here's something I've been learning personally. Maybe God hasn't been absent. Maybe we've just been looking for him in the wrong places. Can I be transparent with y'all real quick? Is that cool? Listen, I've had moments where I've actually struggled with this. I've had moments where I knew God was real. I knew He had carried me through things that I didn't even think I could survive, right? I knew there were moments where if God hadn't stepped in, man, I do not know where I would be. But even in knowing all of that, I still, to this day, have had moments where I said, God, what are you doing? And I think that's a conversation we need to normalize. I know for some people, they've been taught that, like, you can't bring God your questions. And it's like, who taught you that? Because even if you think about the conversation, the exchange between God and Moses, before Moses ever went out on his mission, he had told God, Lord, you have to get somebody else to do it. I stutter. I don't even, I don't speak well. I don't do, like, he was bringing what was real. You understand what I'm saying? Sometimes we act like faith means you never have questions. Like if you trust God, you should never feel frustrated. But that's not reality. Faith isn't pretending you don't have questions. Yeah, faith is choosing to stay connected to God while you work through those questions. Yeah, there were seasons where I was so focused on the thing I was asking God to change that I couldn't actually see the things He was already changing. I was looking for the breakthrough. I was looking for the open door. I was looking for the answer. And because I didn't see those things happening, I started feeling like nothing was happening at all. But then God challenged me with the question, what if you're only looking for me in the outcome? Yo, that question really made me think. I'm like, hold on, what? Because if I'm honest, right? I was looking for God in the thing I wanted Him to do, but I wasn't always looking for God in what He was already doing. And I think that's where a lot of us find ourselves. We believe God is powerful enough to change our situation, but sometimes we forget He's also working in our situation. And that leads me to my first point. Stop judging God's presence by your progress. I think one of the biggest mistakes we make is assuming if God is moving, I should be able to see it. And for me, I understand why we think that because naturally we measure progress by what we can see. We see the promotion, we see the new opportunity, we see the relationship restored, we see the business growing, we see the breakthrough. But what happens when the growth isn't happening underneath? I'm sorry, but what happens when the growth is happening underneath the surface? Like, what happens when God is doing something that doesn't immediately show up in your circumstances? Think about a seed. When you plant a seed in the ground, the first thing that happens is not a flower. No, the first thing that happens is roots. And not everybody celebrates roots. Nobody takes a picture of the roots, right? Nobody posts, look at my amazing roots. Nobody does that. You feel what I'm saying? But without the roots, there would be no fruit. And sometimes that's where God has us, in a root building season, a season where He's developing things nobody else can see. Your patience, your discipline, your character, your ability to trust, your ability to handle pressure, your ability to let go of things that are no longer serving you. And here's the difficult part. Those things doesn't always feel like progress. Sometimes growth feels like frustration. Sometimes growth feels like isolation. Yeah. And sometimes growth feels like waiting. But just because it doesn't feel exciting doesn't mean that God isn't working. Yo, I was thinking about this the other day, right? I was thinking about the idea of like using a GPS, right? So most of us, we use GPSs every day. Even if we know where we're going, we still just put it on because we want information, right? We want to know what's the fastest route, where's the traffic, is there any accidents, what's ahead, right? Now, imagine you're driving somewhere and your GPS tells you to take a different route. And you're like, no, that don't make sense. I don't want to go that way. I know a better way. And so you ignore it, right? Then later you find out there was an accident on the road that you wanted to take. There was traffic. There was something ahead that you couldn't see. The GPS wasn't trying to frustrate you, it was trying to guide you, right? And sometimes that's how God works. We get frustrated because God isn't taking us the route we planned. But God sees things that we don't see. He knows things that we don't know. He sees what's ahead. You understand what I'm saying? And sometimes the delay we complain about is actually the protection. Sometimes the closed door we cry over is actually the preparation. Sometimes the season we want to escape is actually the season that's building us. Listen, here's what I want you to take away from this first point. Don't confuse slow motion with no motion. Yeah, just because you don't see anything changing doesn't mean nothing is happening. God can be working in ways that your eyes haven't caught up to yet. And maybe today you need to stop asking, God, why hasn't this changed? And start asking, God, what are you showing me in this season? What are you building in me? God, what am I learning right now that I couldn't learn another way? Because sometimes the greatest evidence that God is working isn't what changed around you. It's what's changing on the inside of you. Yeah, for sure. Listen, and that brings me to something else I think we have to talk about. Because I think even when we understand that God is working, right, we still miss him sometimes. And you might ask, okay, but why is that? It's because we're looking for him in the big moments, right? We're looking for him in the fireworks. We're looking for him in the undeniable signs. We're looking for something so big we can't question it. But what if God has been showing up in smaller ways this entire time? What if he's been leaving fingerprints instead of fireworks? And that's where we going next. I think we have to do a better job of looking for God's fingerprints and not just fireworks. I think one of the biggest reasons we struggle to recognize God in our everyday lives is because we have created this expectation of what his presence is supposed to look like. We expect the big moment, the undeniable miracle, the thing that happens and everybody around us says, there is no way that happened without God. And don't get me wrong, God absolutely does those things. You understand what I'm saying? But there are moments where God moves in ways that leaves you speechless. There are moments where doors open that you know only God could have opened, right? There are moments where you look back and say, only God could have brought me through that. Those are absolutely powerful moments, right? But here's what I've learned. God doesn't only show up in moments that make everybody clap. Sometimes he shows up in the moments that make you pause. The quiet moments, the small moments, the moments that seem ordinary until you look back and realize, wait a minute, God was in that. Look, have you had some moments like that? I think sometimes we miss God because we're looking for the fireworks. We're looking for the sky to open. We're looking for something dramatic. We're looking for a sign so obvious that we don't have to wrestle with whether or not it was him. But sometimes God leaves fingerprints, and the fingerprints are different than fireworks. See, fireworks are loud, they get everybody's attention, they happen quickly, but fingerprints are evidence that someone was here. Yeah, they are proof of presence. They are small details that tell a bigger story. And I think God leaves fingerprints all throughout our lives. The problem is sometimes we're moving too fast to notice them. This is what I want you to do. I want you to think about your own life. Have you ever had a conversation with somebody at exactly the moment you needed it? You were struggling, you were questioning yourself, you were feeling discouraged, and then somebody says something that hits your spirit differently. They didn't even know what you were carrying. They didn't even know a battle was happening in your mind. They didn't even know the prayer you had been praying. But somehow the words came at the exact time. That is a fingerprint. Have you ever had a closed door? Have you ever had a door closed that you were completely convinced needed to be open, right? And at the time, you were hurt. You were frustrated. You were asking God, why would you let this happen? But you later realized, if that door had opened, I would have walked into something I wasn't prepared for. If I would have stayed connected to that person, I would have missed what God was trying to bring into my life. If I would have gotten that opportunity too soon, I might have I might not have had the maturity to handle it. That is a fingerprint. Have you ever looked back at a difficult season and realized, I don't even know how I made it through that? Because let's be very honest, there are some things you survived that you know you weren't your strongest. You know you didn't survive because you was your strongest, right? There were some moments where you was exhausted, moments where you wanted to quit, moments where you didn't have the answers, but somehow you kept going. Somehow you found another level of strength to tap into. Somehow you made it to the other side. That is a fingerprint. I think if we, and I think we have to be careful because sometimes we only count the things we pray for that happen exactly the way we want it. But God is not just present in the things that go according to our plan. God is also present in the protection. He's present in the redirection. He's present in the lessons. He's present in the strength. He's present in the wisdom you gain from what you went through. He's present in the version of yourself that you are becoming. When God's answer doesn't look like what you expected, I think one of the hardest things about trusting God is accepting that his answers don't always look like our expectations. Because sometimes we pray for one thing and God answers a deeper thing. And we pray, God, change my situation. And God says, let me change your perspective. We pray, God, remove this struggle. And God says, let me strengthen you through it. We pray, God, give me the opportunity. And God says, let me prepare you for the opportunity. Yeah, sometimes we miss the answer because we're looking for a specific package. We already decide what God's response should look like, but God doesn't need our imagination to limit his ability. I think about how many times we miss the small things. We wake up every morning and that becomes normal. We have another chance to try again and that becomes normal. We have people who love us and that becomes normal. We have learned lessons from things that used to destroy us and that becomes normal. But those things aren't normal. Those are gifts. Those are reminders. Those are moments where God is saying, I am still here. Listen, one of the things I had to learn on my journey is that gratitude and frustration can exist at the same time. And I think that's important to say because sometimes people feel guilty about being frustrated. They think if I'm frustrated, does that mean I don't trust God? No, that doesn't mean that. You can be grateful and still be waiting. You can appreciate what God has done for you and still desire what you are believing him for. You can say, God, I know you've been faithful, but I'm still tired. God, I know you've been carrying me, but this season is still difficult. God, I know you are good, but I still do not understand. Yeah, like God can handle all of that because God isn't looking for a fake relationship where we pretend everything is okay. He is inviting us into a real relationship where we bring him into everything, the good, the bad, the questions, the frustration, the fears, all of it. Listen, here's another way to think about it. Driving at night, right? Your headlights don't show you the entire road. They don't show you the destination. They don't show you every turn you're going to make, right? They show you enough for the next step. And that's how God works often. He gives you enough light for today, enough strength for today, enough wisdom for today, enough grace for today. But we get frustrated because we're asking God, show me the next 5 years, Lord. And God is saying, trust me with today. Jesus, y'all, come on. We try to get ahead of God. What? Sometimes it could be Monday. More I'm finna speak. It could be Monday. We thinking about Friday problems. And the crazy thing is, we get so frustrated that we start believing whatever we're telling ourselves. Meanwhile, you don't know what God got lined up between today and Friday, where what you telling yourself, it ain't even, it's a false scenario because it ain't gonna happen because God been and showed up and showed out between today and Friday. So now you done wasted time frustrated about something that's not even real. Come, I know, listen, y'all better not be faking here. Y'all, listen, you better drop in the comments. You know what I'm talking about. Listen, if God showed us everything at once, we might not even have the capacity to handle it. Listen, what I want you to take away from this second point is don't overlook God's fingerprints because they don't look like fireworks. God's presence is not only found in the moments where everything changes, sometimes God's presence is found in the fact that we didn't give up. Sometimes God's presence is found in the peace we cannot explain. Do you understand what I'm saying? Sometimes God's presence is found in the strength you didn't know you had. Sometimes God's presence is found in the doors that were closed that he protected you from. God's presence is even found in people he sent at the right time. So slow down long enough to notice it, because you might be waiting for God to show up. Meanwhile, God has been showing you he been here the whole time. Listen, I want to leave you with something to think about. What if the reason you're frustrated isn't because God hasn't been working, but because you have only been looking at one area of your life? What if you've been so focused on that prayer that hasn't been answered that you've forgotten the prayers that have? What if you have been so focused on where you want to go that you've missed how much God has already grown you? Take some time this week and ask yourself, where have I seen God's fingerprints? Where has God protected me? Where has God strengthened me? Where has God been working that I haven't acknowledged? Because sometimes the reminder you need isn't that God is going to show up. Sometimes the reminder you need is remembering he already has. All right, family. I hope this conversation has encouraged you, but I also hope it has challenged you. All right. I think we all are experiencing seasons where we are waiting on God to move, and we're waiting for a breakthrough. We're waiting for an answer. We're waiting for one of the things we've been praying about. But I want you to remember this. A waiting season does not mean God is absent. A quiet season does not mean God is silent. And a slow season does not mean God is standing still. God can be working even when you don't see the evidence yet. So this week, don't just look for the big moments. Look for the fingerprints. Pay attention to the small things, the conversations, the lessons, the strength, the peace, the growth. Because you might realize that God has been closer than you actually think. In the next episode, we're going to continue this conversation, because recognizing God is one thing, but learning how to trust him in the waiting is another. All right. We're going to talk about why waiting is not wasted time, why God develops us before he delivers us, and how to continue moving forward when you don't have all the answers. Listen, if this episode spoke to you, definitely share it with somebody who might be in a waiting season right now. Somebody might not need another motivational quote. They might need a reminder that God hasn't forgotten them. I appreciate y'all rocking with me today. Until next time, keep growing, keep trusting the process. And remember, your current season is not just taking you somewhere, it's making you someone. All right? I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.